Hey everyone, this is Shpan, and as of last week, I've finally started Morrowind. Morrowind is a game that a lot of my viewers have been telling me that I have to try. Even from the day that I uploaded my very first Daggerfall video, I received comments recommending Morrowind to me. And it's a game I've honestly always meant to try, but over time I just never got around to it. Earlier this year, when my love for Daggerfall really grew, I was getting more into Elder Scrolls lore and just enjoying the world, and I realized that this is the year that I have to try Morrowind. And so I finally put aside some time to dive into it completely blind. All I knew about Morrowind was that a lot of Elder Scrolls fans consider it to be the best in the series. I'd heard that some of its design choices can be at times a bit divisive, especially its combat system, and I also knew that it was pretty different from Daggerfall, which is something that I'd always assumed to be true of the later Elder Scrolls titles in general. The last thing I heard was that the movement speed was incredibly slow. And even though that's kind of true, personally, stuff like that really does not bother me. I like taking things slow, and I enjoy getting into the role playing vibes of whatever game I'm playing, and so even before starting, I was thinking that a slower movement speed might actually be a good fit for me. Also, throughout this video, I'll be making a lot of comparisons to Daggerfall, and not to directly try and determine which game does which design choices better, though I will have some opinions on that, but instead just because it's interesting to me, and I like breaking down game design, especially in games I really like. After playing the game for a little bit more than 10 hours, I'm excited to share with you guys my initial thoughts on Morrowind. But before we get started, if you enjoy content like this, consider subscribing to my channel, subscribing to my Patreon, or becoming a channel member through the link in the video description below. And with all that out of the way, let's get into my initial thoughts on my first Morrowind experience.
You finally arrived, but our records don't show from where.
After a pretty nicely voice-acted opening cutscene to set the context for the story ahead, the first step was getting off the boat and making my character. In Daggerfall, the pre-made classes are super weak and often have a lot of suboptimal skill choices or skills placed in suboptimal slots. So I figured from my experience with Daggerfall that maybe Morrowind would be the same way. I was also not worried at all about making a build that's weak or really bad because I enjoyed just choosing what I like or what feels right, especially in a first playthrough, and letting it organically play out rather than try to look up what's optimal or even how to build a character. So anyway, thinking along those lines, I went with a custom class. I'm 100% sure at this point you guys can already see I've made a bunch of mistakes in skill selection and skill placement, but I wanted to go into it blind and not look up any builds just like I did the very first time I played Daggerfall. I knew there would be a ton of suboptimal choices on my end, but to me it's all part of the experience of a first time playthrough, and that's something I really value, especially in games that I think might be special to me. That being said, definitely let me know how bad my build is in the comments. To all of the Morrowind fans watching, feel free to get it all out of your system. I'll be happy to read your feedback. I love martial builds, so I went slightly in that direction, but I had the idea that I wanted to make a bit of a hybrid to get a taste of both martial and magic options. A fighter druid multi-class concept is what I was trying to build for, so I took heavy armor, blunt weapon, and also grabbed alteration and restoration for my magic schools. I do have to say that while looking through the skill options, I was so sad to see that the language skills from Daggerfall did not return in Morrowind. I actually had no idea it was going to be this way. This was my first major moment of just like, what the heck is happening in this game? If you've been following the channel for a bit, then you know I love the language skills in Daggerfall, and not seeing them here definitely surprised me. I was really expecting them to make a comeback. But I also think that's alright. I think every game should have its own vision, and so I was happy to see what Morrowind had to offer in its skill selections. Part of me always imagined, or maybe just hoped, that Morrowind actually expanded on the design and flavor of language skills, but I guess it just wasn't meant to be. But anyway, I was really glad to see that Morrowind kept a similar character creation system to Daggerfall. An important part of role-playing to me is developing the character's build, committing to certain strengths and certain weaknesses, and role-playing within the context of those qualities. I see builds as an important contextual element of role-playing, and defining the strengths and weaknesses of a character is a part of role-playing. It opens up what's possible and what's not possible for your character to do in any given situation. And so I really dislike when RPGs allow for zero commitment to a character's build, where you can just sort of be good at anything and everything. I enjoy having trade-offs when building a character, and going into Morrowind, I wasn't sure if it was going to be more like Daggerfall, or more like the modern Elder Scrolls titles in this respect. And I was really happy to see that Morrowind forces a player to choose the skills that their character excels at in character creation. It's exactly what I love to see in character creation, and I love it in Daggerfall for the same reasons. There is another part of Morrowind's character creation that I was surprised to see completely missing: the advantages and disadvantages system of Daggerfall. A system that lets you choose from a huge selection of different flavorful advantages and disadvantages to really create unique aspects of the build.
Interesting.
And it's a really
Now,
great
before I
system, so I
step
was
these
surprised to
waters,
see that
make
it
sure
didn't
this
return in
information is
Morrowind.
correct.
The addition of a celestial sign is nice, but doesn't come anywhere near the variety or interesting build potential that the advantages system in Daggerfall provides, in my opinion. However, I think the skill selection in Morrowind is really good. It was cool to see the spear weapon type added to the game, and there was a good variety of different skills for different class concepts. Overall, I felt Morrowind's character creation was pretty good. After making my character and moving around a bit, the first thing that really captured my attention was one of my first conversations.
Anytime.
Conversations with NPCs really surprised me in this game. I could see a little bit of Daggerfall in it, but it really goes much further in Morrowind and makes a lot of the changes that I always thought would be nice to see in Daggerfall. Conversations feel great, and there are often so many conversation topics available to the player, with more conversation options opening up as the conversation progresses, creating both a natural conversation flow, but also adds to the realistic unpredictability of conversations. The player doesn't always know exactly where the topics of a conversation will lead them, and so there's a sense of conversational exploration, which I thought was really cool design. In general, I think Morrowind's conversations are really a great example of how even today we can see the benefit of purely text, no voice acting dialogue. I'm reminded again of how valuable it is, because it allows the player to engage in more immersive, more extensive conversations with NPCs in a way that feels natural and flows from topic to topic. It's not restricted by the developer's voice acting budget. This would realistically be very difficult to do in a fully voice acted game. There is so much possible conversation available to the player in Morrowind that even if a game today had the desire to present this much dialogue fully voiced, the budget would likely prevent it from ever happening. At some point in my first play session, I was trying to think about why Morrowind's dialogue with NPCs felt so good to me. I think the reason that this design choice of extensive conversation topics being available to the player fits so well for me is that the conversations with NPCs don't feel exclusively like a tool for quest completion. They're provided to the player because interesting characterization and making Morrowind feel alive and responsive was clearly an intentional goal of the development team. I think of this as an extension of regional storytelling, and in my opinion, Daggerfall is not really that good at capturing this. Because in Daggerfall, NPC conversation exists almost entirely to provide the player with some practical information, though there are a few exceptions to that. Daggerfall NPCs can sometimes be fun to interact with, but you can't really learn much about the world through the dialogue with them, even though you can often learn about the unfolding current events of a specific playthrough. But more importantly, is that you absolutely aren't given anywhere near as much characterization in comparison to Morrowind. Like I mentioned a bit ago, characterization, even when irrelevant to the greater plot points or themes of a story, are still a major part of regional storytelling, and memorable characters bring value to regions that are otherwise not particularly relevant to the main story. A shopkeeper or citizen of a town can be really interesting and memorable in Morrowind, and this actually is sometimes possible in Daggerfall depending on the situation, but it is extremely rare. Next, I want to talk about the combat system. And to be fair, I consider myself still very, very early in my playthrough of this game, and I understand the argument that some fans might already be typing in the comments section, so let me just really quickly address this. That I know these games aren't really about the combat system, or it might be too soon for me to have this opinion and I should wait until I'm later in my playthrough. But this video is really about my initial thoughts, and I'm actually very open to changing my opinions after spending more time with a game. In fact, it happens to me all the time. To get back to the first point, I agree with the idea that combat is not the most important aspect of any Elder Scrolls game, but it still does matter to me. In Daggerfall, long before I started using mods, combat felt fast and engaging. There's a really great mix of both stat-heavy reliance on combat performance, as well as player skill expression. In Daggerfall, you can move quickly in and out of an enemy's range, and the potential hitboxes of their strikes, as well as dodge both arrows and spells if you have fast enough reactions, or if you built a character to have a high speed attribute. Dodging an arrow or a projectile spell in real time as you close the gap on a caster or archer is so satisfying in Daggerfall. In general, I want some amount of skill expression while still having a build be very relevant to my character's combat capabilities, and I also want different builds to feel differently when playing. Hitting that balance in an RPG is obviously not easy, and so far it feels to me, even as a new player, that although Morrowind succeeds at hitting a decent balance, it doesn't hit it as well as Daggerfall does, in my opinion. I still feel that the combat system is fine in Morrowind, but I don't really love it at this point in the playthrough. It's obviously way slower than Daggerfall, but that change of pace is actually something I'm enjoying about it. In Daggerfall, combat with an enemy is fast. Not just the speed of movement and the speed of attacks, but also the time to kill is very quick. In Daggerfall, it's not uncommon even early in the game to kill an enemy in 2 or 3 hits, and this time to kill is pretty consistent throughout most of a playthrough, except for a few of the tankier enemies. Morrowind, on the other hand, opts for a longer engagement combat system. I want to show you guys what my first fight in Morrowind looked like.
You Enwa! I have you! I have you! Now you die! Die, Fetcher! You will die! Die, Fetcher!
Honestly, it was really engaging and pretty exhilarating. It made me so surprised at how often I hear on the Elder Scrolls subreddit that Morrowind had a terrible combat system and that it was way too slow, because this seems to me to be completely intentional design choices by the Morrowind developers. These longer engagements are fun and tense. I can feel how the attributes are playing a major role, determining whether or not various aspects of combat succeed for both the player and the enemy. But in this specific example, I had to try and dodge the enemy's attacks, make use of sprint and the environment to kite the enemy when my health got low and I needed to cast a defensive spell, which made me also need to monitor my stamina bar and be careful how quickly I was spending it. Choosing between a fully charged up attack or multiple weaker strikes is a nice combat gambling aspect that will complement certain builds over others. There was a good sense of difficulty as well. I got chunked from only a few strikes, and at multiple points I got seriously close to dying. What felt similar to Daggerfall was the sense that each strike matters in this game, and each decision in combat matters too. I was pleasantly surprised with my experience after having read a lot of the negative opinions about Morrowind's combat system online. I found it to be a lot of fun, and I'm glad I chose a melee fighter that makes use of some more defensive spell schools because it made for a satisfying combat experience with plenty of options and moment-to-moment decision making. I am curious how longtime fans of Morrowind feel about its combat system. For those that enjoy the game or have played it multiple times, do you find there's enough combat options for the player, and how do you feel about the pace? The funny thing is, I think even if someone were to feel unsatisfied with Morrowind's combat system, that they can still really enjoy this game, as it offers so much outside of combat. One thing I'm worried about with the combat system is its potential for enemies to become health sponges in the later stages of the game. The time to kill is obviously way slower in this game than in Daggerfall, and that can sometimes be difficult to balance. It's an issue I personally feel both Oblivion and Skyrim have, but at this point in the playthrough I am enjoying Morrowind's combat system. This is one aspect that I'll keep carefully monitoring as I continue my playthrough, and I'll have to revisit my feelings on this after some time. In this next section here, I want to talk briefly about my impressions of the world of Morrowind and how it feels to me so far. The mood and tone is excellent, and I think the art style has held up really well over the years. I think it actually looks much better than something like Oblivion. I might sound crazy, but I actually prefer the way Morrowind looks now, even over Oblivion Remastered. I like Daggerfall's pixel art style, but it's so stylistically different than Morrowind that I find it too difficult to really compare the two. They both look great in their own ways. I have to mention that Morrowind makes great use of lighting and interior design. I like the color palette for the location as well, as it captures a bleakness that matches well with the culture and mood of the Dunmer population. And speaking of that, Morrowind has a really believable and immersive sense of culture and its people. The Dunmer population will make comments about you as a foreigner, and they make up the majority of the NPCs you'll see, but there is still a certain percentage of other foreigners from other regions like the occasional Altmer, Breton, and others. Something that I could quickly feel is that Morrowind's Dunmers really feel like a distinct cultural group. Members of the race have similar ways of communicating to you without feeling like the same individual, and through the writing and characterization of NPCs, you develop an understanding of their mannerisms and who they are as a people. The sense of culture is just so strong in this game. It's dynamic, and NPCs play off the cultural range of behavior of its people in really interesting ways. They have their flaws and their strengths. They're generally suspicious of foreigners and have no shame in expressing that distrust, but many also care to assess the qualities of the foreigner they're interacting with and engage with them in sometimes deceptive and sometimes cooperative ways. Capturing a sense of culture like this is really not easy to do in fantasy works of any kind, not just in games. The character and identity of Morrowind as a place is just excellent. I don't know how else to put it. At this point in time, I really see it as a unique characteristic of Morrowind among all the other Elder Scrolls titles. I just don't even think they compare to Morrowind in this respect. Pretty early on, I tried to rest on the street and woke up to an assassin from the Dark Brotherhood trying to kill me. I was able to fight him off and got some extremely good equipment for my level. And I actually got attacked by another one within the next hour or so of playing, but by this time I was getting better at the combat system and I felt it was a lot easier for me. But now I had 2 sets of this really valuable gear to sell at this Imperial encampment I found on the way to Balmora. I sold both sets to get myself an entire new set of heavy armor to match my skill selection, and also picked up a 2-handed blunt weapon for my build. I was feeling pretty strong at this point. I already had a decent one-handed mace from the beginning town shop that I had got before leaving, but this new Warhammer was sick and did a lot more damage. When I first sold my Dark Brotherhood equipment to the shopkeeper and then exited out of the store interface, I thought the game had a graphical bug of some sort when I looked back at this Nord. But it actually just turns out that he decided to equip what I gave him, which is honestly pretty cool to see a shopkeeper do. Alright, let's talk about writing next. The writing feels pretty good so far to me. It's kind of a funny thing, but in Daggerfall, Bethesda did not really use that game as an opportunity to flex their writing prowess. Because most of what I would consider the important writing, like good prose or dialogue, is really reserved for only the main quest conversations and the very many books you can find throughout the game or read in the libraries of towns and cities. And I've read a decent amount of those books, and plenty of them have decent writing, but that is really the extent that I would praise Daggerfall's writing. It's just about decent to me, nothing too special. And I'm not really talking about the quality of the lore or things like that, but just the actual writing itself. And in some ways, Daggerfall's procedural generation of NPCs prevents opportunities for more carefully constructed characterization. Morrowind, on the other hand, is giving me some pretty well-written dialogue, and there's plenty of opportunities to interact with their characterization. It's something that Morrowind clearly focused on. NPCs have a ton of different ranges of eccentricities and varying personalities. I found myself intentionally going out of my way to have conversations with all sorts of different NPCs. This moment of running into this lady in the middle of the night really captured my attention. I really enjoyed this storytelling moment, because there's something immediately eerie about this woman, alone near the side of the road at night, claiming to have been robbed, but also implying that she has fallen in love with her assailant. It's all really strange and memorable, and I could feel in that moment that maybe she can't be fully trusted, that maybe I was being set up or walking into some kind of trap, especially after knowing that the Dark Brotherhood cared enough to send assassins to try and eliminate me. The compounding contextual factors of what I had experienced so far in my playthrough made me evaluate my interaction with this woman in a new way. Overall, the moment stood out to me a lot. The bizarre nature of this woman's request and the way she communicates that request to you makes her characterization really memorable. My initial impressions when comparing the systems that make up the foundation of both Daggerfall and Morrowind is that Daggerfall provides more of a clean slate to roleplay within. Morrowind may not provide the same empty canvas for sandbox roleplaying as Daggerfall, However, the trade-off for that is that Morrowind provides extremely satisfying narrative moments and much better characterization, and without forcing those side narratives or main narrative moments on the player in the way that many modern RPGs do. Providing quality narrative moments, but also trusting your players with the freedom to roleplay outside of that narrative is really not an easy thing to capture in RPGs. And my initial feeling is that Morrowind is doing a really great job of balancing those two design structures, which are often in conflict with one another. Overall, I was really impressed with my first 10 hours of Morrowind. Before I played, I expected to like a lot of the ideas in the game, but I wasn't expecting to necessarily enjoy the execution of those ideas. As a big fan of Daggerfall, I'm fully aware of how modding can really harness the potential of many of the great design choices in these older Bethesda titles, and so I'm excited to eventually take a deep dive into the modding options after I finish my first playthrough. But just as I did with Daggerfall, I want the full vanilla Morrowind experience for my initial playthrough. So far, I'm feeling Morrowind really nails a lot of what I love in RPGs, and role-playing in general. And if you guys really enjoyed watching me try Morrowind, maybe in the future I can upload a follow-up video or two on my thoughts as I continue my playthrough. Let me know if that's something you guys would be interested in. I hope you guys enjoyed watching this. The start of my journey in Morrowind has been a blast so far, and I'm excited to really get deeper into it as I begin to understand more of how the systems work and interact. If you enjoyed this video, you can help support the channel by subscribing or becoming a channel member. Thanks again for watching, everyone, and I hope I'll see you in the next video. Take care.